Yes, so now it's my pleasure to give the floor to the initiator of this assembly for permacircular museums, who will be moderating this panel, Stéphane Verlet-Bottéro. And if you have any questions, just write it into the chat. I will take care of it.
Thank you, and thank you so much, Alicia, to set up the shared intention and attention to tune in with a kind of very peaceful state of mind to delve into the discussion. So thank you so much, and thanks everyone for joining. And already I must say so many thank you to all of you dear speakers who are here today, Amal, Nataša, Klass, and Ella, for accepting the invitation and joining this conversation titled Museum as Shelter. So I'll just make a little bit of an introduction to the discussions that we're going to have today. We've just starting with a few words on museum. Why museums? We recognize that museums, of course, at least larger historical museums, are institutions with a very problematic genealogy that relates to colonial extraction, nation-state identity politics. So within this assembly, we're also concerned with how art museums are inserted in entropic infrastructures of global capital, which implies injunctions to grow, to accumulate, to compete, and to mimic economies of production and circulation that are based on fossil energy and destructive ecologies. But in recent years, perhaps too slowly, I think that things are also evolving. And we can see now how some museums open more and more their doors to social movements, engage in debates around restitutions, for example, or just digesting the planetary emergency and the scale of mutations that need to be pushed forward. Of course, we should not be naive or minimize institutions' tendency to sometimes absorb the critique. And of course, that goes for museums, but also universities and public agencies, etc. Or sometimes they do a little more than rhetorical announcements instead of structural commitments. But on the other hand, museums can be strong spaces of presence to amplify and disseminate counter-narratives and potential for change. In this panel, we won't perhaps consider so much the case of the large historical museums, but we'll sort of have in mind maybe a twofold critical dynamic that might play in reinventing institutions, art institutions, and opening them towards more than human communities. So on one hand, perhaps internal projects within institutional structures that open new reflections and actions within institutions and contribute to reshape them possibly. And on the other hand, we'll hear about maybe new or alter organizations that come to be with an explicit focus on caring and repairing. So that leads to me to say a few words now on shelter. Donna Haraway or Anna Tsing and many writers actually refer to the Anthropocene that we are living in as the accelerating disappearance of any possibility of refuge. And I think that's a powerful narrative as it speaks both to the disappearance of natural habitats as much as the disappearance of the possibility to seek and find refuge in social and human contexts. And with the reactionary authoritarian turn of nation states around the world now, the attacks on the conditions of planetary habitability is getting even more blunt, more obvious and more radical. So there's this multiplication of violence against people, violence against nature that bring the question, will art and should art institutions be able to challenge their ecologically problematic obsession, for example, with preserving objects, and what does it take for institutions to change and make more space for activities that incorporate mutual aid, justice, solidarity. And yeah, how can institutions, not just museums actually, provide a shelter, a space for activists, social movements, but also animals, plants, forests, even it could be agroecological practices that interweave food producers and ecosystems, for example, just to name a few examples. Another writer like Achille Mbembe has said that the most ambitious task we have now is to reform thinking by weaving it to feeling, sensing, and projecting in order to equip ourselves with a shared human faculty to repair, to sustain, and to care for this damaged world. And repairing, of course, cannot in itself bring back all the energies that have vanished from the world. But it is about learning to unite with the world's suffering, perhaps, and begin the work, the necessary work on accountability and compensation. So for me, this way of addressing the problem of institutions and ecology sort of inspires and resonates strongly with the restoration work that tried to engage with the Tetcam Museum, which is about reclaiming and restoring an abandoned fruit orchard ecosystem that lies about just 10-minute walk outside the museum in Karlsruhe. And so since a year or so, now a little more than a year, the institution committed to take care of regenerating the trees with the guidance, of course, of the Karlsruhe city's agriculture department experts. And so we are learning to prune the trees, to maintain the soil, to harvest the fruits, and to plant new trees also. And yeah, in general, foster the well-being of the space and the return of like insect and bird life in the habitat, in the space. So it has been a strong experience. I mean, we have deeply bonded with this particular ecosystem and its inhabitants. And that's a kind of new relationship that connects two bodies, so the body museum and the body orchard. Of course, it's a modest gesture of repair, but it has, I guess, deep implications for the role of the institution towards its natural surrounding. And it has implications also, I could add, for ourselves within our own bodies as contributors to this effort. So with the birth of this more than human collective, I guess we explore the idea of reimagining the museum as a place that puts its expertise on maintaining and conserving object collections to sustain and shelter a life in alliance with human and non-human agencies in the city, in Karlsruhe. So for me, that's a kind of example or background or transition to the discussion that we'll have today with this amazing panel of speakers that I'm so very happy to welcome in order to deepen this reflection. Since the work that all the panelists are doing is really inspiring to us as part of this ongoing reflection. And before we transit to the discussion, I just need to excuse Sonia Lawson because she just had an emergency today, so she cannot be with us. It's unfortunate, but it happens. But the project she's leading in Togo is so exciting that I really have to say a few words about it, and I encourage you all to look into it. So Sonia is the director of Palais de Lomé, which is a new museum in Lomé in Togo, and it's in an incredible location. It's facing the sea, and it's housed in what used to be a former colonial palace of governors, and that was just refurbished to become this public art museum. And it also has a public park that harbors a magnificent ecosystem. So I think that the gesture of reappropriating a colonial ruin and turning it into a space of art and culture available to the Togolese people is very powerful, but it's also even beyond that, because there was this a special effort during the construction to use and select sustainably sourced wood and local materials, to work with the local builders and construction expertise. And the Palais de Lomé team, they also worked with scientists and botanists and citizen science to inventory all the natural habitat of the space. So they restored the green surroundings of the palace, which had been left uncared for, to bring in endemic tree and plant species from the subregion. And they installed beehives, and all of this resulted in the return of birds, insects, bats on the site. So life that is really essential within the regional ecosystem. So it's becoming a safe habitat for these animals and plants. And just to finish on that, I just received the museum's newsletter last week, the monthly newsletter, and I love that it announces not only a new exhibition in the art program of the month, but it also features news and observations on the park biodiversity and the well-being of the plants. So I really hope to visit one day, and I just wanted to celebrate, despite Sonia not being with us, how this example is a kind of an example of radically reinventing the art museum and its relation to the public and the ecosystem from Togo in West Africa. So to begin the discussions with the wonderful speakers who are here, I would like to maybe start by thinking about the possibility to create safe spaces for attention, empathy, solidarity, and communing in the way that it takes time, probably a lot of time, to set up these possibilities. And I guess it requires to think outside the standardized, compulsive rhythm of exhibition seasons and the sort of frantic art rhythm. So I'll direct my first question to you, Amal, on this question of time, because as a curator, you have been engaging for a very long period of 10 years on a beautiful, very important in my view, project called On Edgware Road. It brings together artists and residents of the Edgware Road area in London. And this is particularly meaningful to us at the Tetcam as well, since developing a practice such as restoring an ecosystem also involves, on the part of the institution, a commitment on several years. So we're in this kinship for many years from now. So can you tell us a little bit more about this project and what it means to work outside the gallery context according to different sensitivities of place and time? And I mean, that's already quite a lot, but I have other questions for you. But maybe if you can speak also about this kind of alter institutions that supported the project. What was it called? The Center for Possible Studies, right? So maybe how did that support the initiative? And we'll maybe delve more later into that aspect. That how did that kind of alter organization sit in relation with the main partner or main sponsor of the project, I guess?
Yeah, sure. Shall I be sharing my screen? Should I share my screen? And I was just going to share with you all some images and a map maybe so we can locate ourselves. Can everyone see that?
Yes, perfect. Thanks for the map.
Good. But thank you, Stéphane, and thanks so much for this invitation. And I'm excited to be in conversation with all of my fellow panelists and everybody that's joined us today. As you said, Stéphane, I've been working at the Serpentine Galleries now for about 12 years. And so it was actually in 2009 that I arrived to begin this project, which you're mentioning, the Edgware Road project, and the Center for Possible Studies, which this is one of our buildings. So the Center for Possible Studies was a peripatetic kind of moving space that would host many of the different projects that make up this project, the Edgware Road project. So I'm just going to go back here to locate. So I'm in London. I've been living here for 15 years now. And this is the Edgware Road. I don't know if you can see my little cursor, but where this speech bubble, which says Al Markaz Al Arabi, which is the Arabic Center in Arabic. This is taken from an old flyer from a former nightclub on the Edgware Road. So this is like the street, and the Serpentine is based in Hyde Park. And so for those of you who don't know London, Hyde Park, super fancy neighborhood. The galleries next to the Kensington Palace, where Princess Diana and all of those lived. So the Edgware Road is where this project takes place, and over the course of the last 12 years, I've worked on about 60 projects that connect artists to different people living and working on this street in this geography, but also beyond, moving beyond this geography to kind of focus on issues. So I guess the thing that connects all of these projects is that it's a commitment to supporting collective processes between artists and different people, from community organizers to civic institutions. So this takes place in residencies, where artists are like have 3-year residencies in care homes. Some of the time they're with activist groups or unions. I've worked a lot with labor unions and migrant justice organizations specifically. So working beyond this neighborhood, but the Center for Possible Studies was where we housed all of this work. And for us, it was really important to center this work not just in the geography, but in the notion of the possible, and the idea that we as agents of the arts institution and the arts institution were supporting artists, but also people that don't consider themselves artists, that have other desires beyond artistic outcomes and the desires of the institution as well, that could be fulfilled through these collaborations that would take place in the Center for Possible Studies. So for me, the Center for Possible Studies, that was really initiated by a curator called Janet Graham. And that for me is a thinking space that would describe all of the ways I work today. And so, yeah, these projects really are thinking about how do we bring in radical pedagogical methodologies, artistic methodologies in relation to urgent social issues. How do we create spaces to rehearse and practice the futures we long for? How are we able to support true collaboration? And I now call collaboration co-liberation. It's this artist, Bronte Velaz, uses the word co-liberation. And I feel like that is the energy behind a lot of these projects. I'm really interested in the possibilities of listening and thinking about what people want to do rather than what an artist wants to do specifically, or what an institution or me as a curator would like to happen in a project. Like, how can we afford to have as an underline this idea of moving towards transformation or liberatory ways of being that aren't reproducing the violences of the institutions we're part of? And how are we able to hold all these different desires at the same time? So this is like a typical day at the Center for Possible Studies. What we would do was we would have residencies for artists, but also residencies for organizing groups, lots of informal organizing groups in the area, because London is so expensive. There's, real estate is probably the biggest currency you could have in the city. And I wanted to say as well that this last decade that I've been working in has very much been, I call it the decade of Tory harm. So it's the decade where the government has really been dismantling all the welfare and care infrastructure in London. So a lot of these projects, even though it was like thinking about that geography of the map I just showed you, what we were really mapping and listening to and interacting with and intervening with was more a witnessing and being implicated within a system of dismantling of social services, of the care system, the breakdown of the NHS, which is the National Health Service. And also we experienced a kind of devolving of government and welfare responsibility to these kind of weird artistic funding possibilities, where as our arts organizations, we had to like suddenly solve isolation and employability and homelessness through art projects, which is like a culture in the UK. But I'm showing you here a few projects. This one particular project, because I can't really speak to many of the projects that I've been working on, but this is a project called Implicated Theatre, which uses radical pedagogical methodologies. In this case, it's theatre of the oppressed, to develop an art project. This art project is almost a decade long, where people involved in the project were driving the rhythm, the decision making about what happens with the group. We do open budgeting, and it's a migrant theatre, which uses methodologies, theatre of the oppressed, to organize other migrant rights organizations and other migrants in the city. So here we see an example of what happens. A lot of the work I do is just process. A lot of the work I do is relationship building. This was an intervention we were doing in unions, where Implicated Theatre were training white union reps on how to deal with migrant needs. This is a project we did with English language teachers to kind of, it was a collaboration to bring theatre of the oppressed or political conversations into English language classes as a way to intervene and like have a more political resistant group of migrants. But I guess I don't have much time, but I really wanted to think about just to present or maybe have a discussion further around actually the possibilities of what it means to do community practice or artistic practice within arts institutions that may be antagonistic to the politics of the groups or the processes that are happening in these projects. I just wanted to kind of put it out there that within like, Serpentine is known as one of a major arts institution in the city. We were able to, within these kind of offsite spaces and longer term projects, really listen and think about what it is we want to do, and whether these are by doing embodied practices like Alicia has shared with us earlier on, which is really like tuning back into our body and our feeling selves as a way to make decisions from and a way to listen to issues. But it's also about thinking very directly about resources that museums can afford us, and thinking about change and resisting the absorption. I think that's something we've always been doing through the civic program, is resisting a different narrative from the institution as to what the projects are. Also resisting public moments. I think invisibility is very, very actually quite important in processes like this. I'd like to just talk about, really direct resource sharing, divesting money. What, for me, the radical space is the budget and an Excel sheet where we can start to associate payment for labor and redistribution of kind of museum money. I guess I'm not going to take up more space, but I just wanted to share some thoughts about the possibilities of creating liberatory spaces within quite violent institutions that are built on supremacist ideology and colonial practice and extractive practices, and ways that within that there are many possibilities for pockets of liberation, I guess, and divestment.
Yeah, thank you so much, Amal. It's really it's a really essential point, and I think the question of reorienting the resources that accumulate in larger institutions to the needs, I will have the chance to maybe expand on that a little bit in the discussion right after. Mm-hmm. But there's also another thing that I find a perfect transition to my question to Klass, which is the question of looking at what people want to do, not just the artist or the institution as a kind of a fictional autonomy. And Klass is kind of working on what also the non-humans would like, and how that could impact the running of organizations. So Klass, you're an artist and researcher and also curator, working within the Het Nieuwe Instituut in Rotterdam. And from within the institution, you're currently developing a wonderful, super inspiring to me project on Zoöps. So that's short for Zooperatives, a concept through which you try to establish a legal format for collaboration between humans and collective bodies of non-humans. And the aim is explicitly to foster ecological regeneration and helping organizations to better take into account the well-being of multi-species communities. So could you tell us a bit more about the process and where it's going? And I don't know, maybe give a super concrete example. Let's say we are an organization now. We want to start or join a Zoöp. How does it work? What do we do?
Thank you very much. First of all, Stéphane and the others of the ZKM team for the invitation. It's fantastic to be here. Thank you, Alicia, also for this really helpful and reconnecting exercise. And in a way, it aligns perfectly with what we try to do. It's the essential work, and also Amal for your beautiful presentation. And I hope this connects. It's quite a different approach what we do, but it's in its intentions. There's a lot of connections. Let me share my screen to tell you what it's about. I have to. This is usually I take much more time to explain what it is, and so excuse me for maybe a little bit. Let's say had the squarish, the squarish feel maybe. So at Het Nieuwe Instituut, which actually in its practice connects in many more ways to the topics that we address here. But one of my main projects is the Zoöp project, which is, I would say, a process of para-institutionalization. It's actually the effort to design and implement a governance model or a new legal entity, which can be, has three goals, as Stéphane already said. Actually, the first is to, and then in no hierarchy, first is to strengthen the legal position, political position of non-humans in human societies. The second one is to foster ecological regeneration. And the third one is that this model should be adoptable but as many organizations as possible. Basically, it has the following three main elements. So a Zoöp, or Zooperative, or Zooperation, is actually an organization that included in its executive board what we call the Zoonomic Foundation. And this is the human representative of the interests, you could say, or the desires, or the political speculation of non-humans. So in there, they're represented on board level. This is the most. There's a whole genealogy of decisions that were made, and we've in the last few months we worked intensely with one of the bigger law firms in the Netherlands, De Brouw, Blackstone, Westbroek, and we arrived at this form to be as best possible, kind of to stay with the trouble, to quote Donna Haraway, obviously. The representative at board level means that the care for non-human life, the care for the quality of non-human life as part of the larger organizational decision-making is permanently an issue. It's not something that is like a point on the agenda that is discussed every now and then, but is always there. So it's as simple as this. So Zoöp is an organization that included in this board the Zoonomic Foundation. The the grounding of the state of Zoöp is actually done by the Zoöp Institute, that also kind of makes sure that not anybody calls themselves a Zoöp, that is actually, you actually have done these things. And then the Zoöp Institute maintains and develops a whole knowledge exchange network between all the different Zoöps to figure out how to do this. And for this, we also use the term zoonomy, which is explicitly meant to be an alternative for the term economy, which, as we know, is actually the issue is not with economy per se properly, but it's actually with capitalist economy. But in the world we live, there's no distinction to be made. There's only a theoretical distinction. But zoonomy wants to be a sphere, a conceptual material sphere that both includes the material exchanges that we understand as economy, without this capitalist notion. At the same time, it's much bigger. It's paying attention to many more signals than the pure financial signals that control or that steer economy. So, to do so, I'm not going to go through this whole process, but basically to do a Zoöp, to actually do a Zoöp, so once you have this Zoonomic Foundation on board, you go through a yearly process of these specific. The first time you do demarcating, so who are the constituent bodies? What bodies are part of the Zoöps? There's a legal, spatial, ecological borders which are not at the same place. So it's this is a matter of discussion and decision making. The second movement is that of observing and sensing, is figuring out how these bodies perceive and also do not perceive each other. And let's say, like I just said, a for-profit company that mainly responds to financial signals is really a different body than a tree that has no clue about financial signals, but operates on chemical. Actually, sonic recently was clear, and a couple of other signals which make up their life worlds. So the question is not only how do they perceive, but also how do they support or maybe hinder each other, obviously. So characterizing comes down to a kind of diagnosis to see this whole space together. So where are the support lines, and where are the sites that hinder and that are violent and that are destructive? And then based on that, you come to a list of potential interventions, which you then execute some in the year, and in the next growth season, this process starts again. So practically, to answer your question, Stéphane, these are the current what we call proto-Zoöps. We're not actually we have not actually, let's say, run through the whole contractual dimension of Zoöps yet. This is in the works right now. This is the law firm is developing this documentation. But these are organizations that adopted the practice to some extent. The picture you see is of a fortress of the waterline, the famous waterline of the Netherlands. And the picture is one of those fortresses, and actually going to host a hotel that wants to be an ecologically regenerative hotel. But there's also the University College Utrecht, where we start actually next coming Friday, a week from now in the afternoon, with our first gathering in the zoonomic curriculum, where we train a couple of, roughly 20 people into the actual process of starting and going through a Zoöp, which will start next Friday, and then there's 4 more Fridays. So they're highly diverse. A farm, this is a regenerative farm next to Nijmegen, a food forest in the city. Some are urban, some are really rural. Some are not actually formally established yet. This is also a huge distinction. Some organizations have to undergo this process of transformation from being one kind of organization and then transforming themselves into Zoöps. But it's also a model that is gaining a lot of attention by new organizations that want to establish from the get-go as a Zoöp, which will make a whole lot of processes much easier. And there's Mäusebunker in Berlin, the former animal testing laboratory that has now become explicitly, it's abandoned and is now becoming a site for multi-species cohabitation that also wants to become a Zoöp. We are here, Venice, a more activist organization from Venice that collaborates with the salt marshes and advocates the perspective that Venice and the salt marshes actually should be seen as one unit and have to kind of act together, and one should care for the other. think, if you're interested, next Thursday at 8:30, there's a public program at Het Nieuwe Instituut, the Thursday Night Live, open to anybody. There will be a live link on the website. If you want to know more, we'll have much more time to go into these.
Klass, maybe just one question that came on the fly in the chat and that could just complement or illustrate your short talk is the question of the representation of non-humans, and I guess how you translate more practically in practice the needs of the ecosystem within the project.
The Zoöp works in a highly situated way. Every Zoöp has to find, to some extent, their own ways to do this. Every Zoöp starts from a different position. This can be, it could be industrial wasteland. It could already be a thriving forest. There are several, let's say, so this characterizing, this finding out how these different bodies actually constitute, support each other or do not support each other. This is kind of the key moment of finding out. And of finding out how, let's say, what is the collective health? What is the state of this collective health? And what should make sense as intervention? And the idea is, I think this aligns beautifully with what you said in the beginning, Stéphane. The idea is that you start with your own physical space, so your actual material surroundings, the actual non-human bodies at your site. So like you in the orchard. But as at some point interventions are no longer necessary, if things go well, a lot of self-care actually happens, and then it's time for your Zoöp to move to the other dimensions of your operational sphere. So to figure out what clients, maybe suppliers, colleagues, or other relations have to be broken up and have to be replaced by other ones. And let's say the prospect, if you follow this to its logical end, is that like if you've gone through everything and all your connections are also Zoöps, then there's nothing to be done anymore. But this is
hopefully be careful sometimes of miracle solutions. Nice, thank you so much. We have to move on a bit to complete the first circle, and I will direct my next question to you, Nataša. You are a curator who has one step in the institutional art world and another step in more autonomous curator and artist-led projects. So you're at the moment head of cultural programming at the Cité internationale des Arts in Paris. You just opened an exhibition at Cubitt. You recently curated the Contour Biennial in Mechelen in Belgium. You are very familiar with the Internationale network of museums and cultural institutions. And just at the beginning of the pandemic, you co-founded an initiative for practices and visions of radical care in Paris, but it's broader than Paris now, I think. So could you tell us about this initiative? What it hopes to achieve and advocate. And in our prep call, we also exchanged on the importance of pushing really intersectional visions, narratives, and agendas. So I want to know a bit more. How do you do that empirically? How do you create empirically and practically such safe places for more than human entities and co-liberations and biocultural diversity, as well as queering and decolonizing perspectives?
Wow, thank you, Stéphane. I feel this question is like a waterfall.
Sorry for the refresh.
Waterfall that, you have to take a droplet by a droplet in order to see it whole. So thank you, Alicia, again. I have never been in a situation where I would not be, I am yawning because of you now. I'm completely relaxed. And at the same time, I'm speaking with this wonderful colleagues and you, Stéphane, on this really important issues. So thanks again for enabling to be speaking in a rather non-regular way, because also the Zooms and all these frameworks induce a lot of behavior and a lot of wording and exchanges that are that should be also broken a little bit and opened up. So thank you for that. So I am indeed, I'm speaking to you from Paris. I'm originally from Slovenia, and I'm born in Yugoslavia. So I am an old Yugoslav soul, but living in Paris since last 16 years. And it was this whole shift was very strange for me to do, actually, for coming from a place within Europe, but so strangely different, you know, in the art context itself. So and especially after experiencing also the war and parts of my family becoming refugees, and so it's something that really marked me, and that keeps its kind of stable. It's a stable ground for me from which I always work. And museum as shelter, I first wrote down, of course, the oxymoron, what to do with this kind of oxymoron that was, you know, you said it, Stéphane, also Amal and Klass. It's especially in the French context, it's such a particular context of very non-caring institutional relationships in the arts. And I think this was also a real in a kind of a shock to see that how much violence there is in relations and work that's supposed to be where we are supposed to care, as the word curator, you know, has the cure in its roots, as we know, care and cure. And how come that we, as you said, Stéphane, how come that we care so much about certain objects whose subjectivities that were holding these objects dear have been undergone genocide? So how is this possible to imagine, and at the same time also this goes into the direction of more than human entities, and what to do with the situations where immediate environment outside of the museum, for example, is toxic. How to bring that in this idea of a museum as shelter. I think it's quite something interesting. And so because I have been for last 8 years a freelance curator, and the more it went, the more I couldn't understand when did we start to name ourselves independent curators, because we are not independent. We are more than dependent on any kind of you know, projects and work. And so with the increased, let's say, understanding of the need of, or the necessity that this field in which I work, and in this locality in which I work, and how much it has to be transformed, I understood that, as some colleagues of mine have been already calling themselves, we are all interdependent curators. So I now am calling myself and some other colleagues of mine interdependent curator. So it goes also in my biography. And I would like to share with you very, as I said in the preparatory talk, a very neoliberal diagram that I managed to put together in order to say what I wish to speak about. And as I said, it's something that I still am trying to understand how to work with the rather open source softwares, and because this is all part, let's say, of the same problem. But with the initiative do you see it well, or do I have to do like that so that you see it? Or can you see?
If you go a little higher up, yeah, that's perfect. I think we get it well that way.
Thank you. So the very modest question that I pose myself is how to transform artistic, curatorial, and institutional practices in the global north infused with racial capitalism into spaces of humbleness, interdependence, locally. So what happened, of course, during this pandemic that is so much talked about as big crisis, you know, of the whole world. And just this morning, I think I have 2 students in the audience, or maybe even some more of my students from St. Lucas in Antwerp. We had a talk with amazing curator, artist, and researcher Persian and Samoan origin, Leuli Eshraghi. And he just modestly and humbly reminded us that his community has undergone several pandemics and have been erased many times and many centuries ago as well by all other kinds of pandemics that were, had the form of violence that now the global north kind of wants to claim as the pandemic. But still, I experienced this pandemic in Paris, and together with my colleague Elena Sorokina, with whom we collaborated and are friends since many years, we tried to observe actually, since many years, let's say, we both, her being of Russian origin, me coming from former Yugoslavia, our kind of differences in how we function, how we work in this sphere of art context in France, but also elsewhere. This is a non-caring space. This is a space which is non-caring. And while the pandemic was hitting hard, it's as if it dawned to everyone that there is something that exists that is called essential workers, which have been on the foregrounds of the work in order to care of those that were affected. And these people mostly are coming from, these are cleaners, these are healthcare workers, bus drivers, you know them all. So, but specifically in France, they are coming from mostly from racialized communities and mostly living in rather poor neighborhoods of the greater cities. And especially in Paris, this is the case. For example, a lot of them were coming from northern parts of very migrant communities, like cities like Aubervilliers. And so what we did with Elena is we organized together with. It started really as a completely loose friendship circle, actually, of artists who for whom we knew. That they are working on practices of care, of ethics, of care, of building relationships either with other humans or non-humans. And we knew that, I think that the prediction is quite palpable, is that the cultural budgets, the art market, this obsolete, let's say, structures that still support the art context in which we work, these practices will be the first to go, the first that will not be supported. So how to enable those vulnerable practices that take so much time to build up, that take so much, it's relationships of trust, of care. This is all time induced. So we decided to, during it was the first action, we were in touch with one of the artists who was working in Aubervilliers with École des Actes. It's a school for youth in difficult economic situations. It's a theater-related project, also for learning French, but they also get paid for their work in theater. So this school has been very much in precarious situation, and we use, let's say, the lockdown to physically draw the line on the pavements. The lockdown was very strict in Paris, so we could move for 1 kilometer. So the law, the kind of very not straight line was drawn between where we were living, more or less around center of Paris, but also north towards Aubervilliers, in a kind of action of supporting the school that was fundraising at the time. And so we helped them, let's say, we contributed to that fundraising. And together with the artists that were part of this action and whom we all knew, we started then after the first lockdown in summer, we created, it's very, you will see like on images, I always say there are a lot of people laughing because we have great time with one another. We are friends. It's a group of people that not necessarily know of each other. People bring in people. We meet for picnics when it's possible, when sanitarily speaking. And what we do is we exchange on where we are at the moment in life, in either working or life situations. And we try to see with what kind of competencies from each of our own perspective could be of help of one each other. So it's really, the project is really, this idea of the initiative is really based on the idea of mutuality and the idea of trying to understand oneself as an artist or as a curator or somebody working within the arts that goes beyond the idea of capitalist, individualist, career-driven, even I would say career-driven, socially engaged practices. As we know, this has become also a problem in itself. So it's completely unfunded. It's several of us in the group have status as refugees. We have known them through several projects that either me, Elena, or others have been involved. And more, so Ismail, that is in the center here, holding a line. So this was his 1 kilometer line. He's a jewelry maker from Afghanistan. He has been for 4 years in France without any status and has in March received his refugee status. So we celebrated it. And we celebrate and meet always under this beautiful, beautiful Lebanese cedar tree. So we try to meet in parks, because one of the members, here I am with a silly smile next to her, Stéphane, you know her, she's an animist, shaman, and an artist, Kati Tutayasu. So yes. She's also somebody that that talks to trees and to spirits, rivers, and animals. And so we, and she talks about, she told us about spaces of dreams as possible spaces of exhibitions. We try to, now we are currently working on the very first invitation to the initiative to do something as in the form of a representation. So it's very difficult, and it creates a lot of questions around how not to do, a little bit like what Bruno Latour has been asking, how not to fall into the trap of going back into the previous production models. So how, when one receives an invitation, which is currently an invitation to Fondation Fiminco, a former pharmaceutical company in outskirts of Paris, in Romainville, a factory which has been polluting a lot of its environment. So how can an initiative for practices and visions of radical care come to a space whose surrounding has been has still traces of polluting? And Katito is working on at the moment as we speak on depollution processes on several layers.
Yeah, and then maybe we can come back to that as a kind of a very empirical example of how the initiative sort of, you know, occupies this more institutional space, and what's the relationship and maybe tension among both. So thank you so much, Nataša.
But maybe I can just, if I can just end with this, it's that we are in the moment of trying to see how could this be, for example, as a kind of code of conduct. What could it be that we bring to the institutions, because the institutions are not working in that way, and we somehow also would like to keep this mutuality as a kind of pretext in order to transform the institutions. So in this way, we have been working with Kenya Tegia, who is French Cameroonian deaf, queer, and seropositive artist, who, in order to survive, literally survive in the space of violence, he created a manifesto, a kind of contract of trust, that whenever he's invited now to an institution, he sends this in. So, and this, as this profoundly, let's say, challenged and transformed our way of working within the initiative, but also within my own personal work as a curator or writer, we are very much inspired by this in order to see if this would not be actually the first point of discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I think that's a great way to prepare or nurture the follow-up of the discussion. But we always also want to keep some time for Q&A. So try to move on a bit and finally ask you, Ella, questions on the work you are doing. So you are an artist and facilitator with a background in film, photography, dance, and somatic practices. And you also had numerous collaborations with international platforms, such as the Bienal de La Habana, other biennials in Latin America, the Documenta 13 in Kassel. And then you also founded Estudio Nuboso, so a platform for exchange between art, science, nature, society, tackling environmental issues in different biocultural contexts in Panama, because you are yourself also a nomadic practitioner between Berlin and Panama. So yeah, could you tell us a bit more about Estudio Nuboso and its focus on valuing biodiversity, restoring tropical ecosystems, and then maybe the last project or initiative that you started? It's a multi-partnership initiative called Suelo that looks at relations between soil, people, sensitivity, and territory. So maybe, yeah, can you explain a bit what you're involved in at the moment?
Yes, my pleasure. And thank you, Stéphane, for the invitation, and to all the panelists for your incredible work, and to Alessia for that nice grounding exercise, which could be easily an example of a point of entry into the Suelo methodology that I will address shortly. So as Stéphane said, introduced to Nuboso, we are a nomadic platform for art and ecology. And although we're founded in Panama and I'm based in Berlin, I also apply these ideas and projects to this side of the ocean when possible. And our goal is really to reconnect people with nature, and to cross this, break this divide that we are separate from nature. And we do this through culture, and we aim to promote a more reciprocal relationship with the planet. So we design multidisciplinary programs. So our artist residencies or residencies always involve other disciplines, not just art. And we want to share knowledge that promotes awareness of our interconnectedness with all of life, and promote regenerative practices, both to individuals and communities and in the environment at large. We are hosting our encounters in different ecosystems and very much place-based. So most of our projects happen in the field, and while we're working with institutions often, we are using alternative spaces. We're really trying to work also with like alternative pedagogies or alternative ways of knowledge transfer. And yeah, like I said, place-based. And so whenever we have also showings of work in progress, we are often, although we're sometimes in museums, we're often in public markets or libraries and parks and gardens, and looking to create not only art objects, but actually also actions that involve a diverse audience. A lot of our work in the last years has been based on around art and science, and working with these institutions who probably see in us kind of a way to more freely access audiences in a different way that they don't allow themselves or can't allow themselves, because as opposed to Europe or something where there's a whole legacy of it's a different issue, it's a different problem that institutions have perhaps, but we kind of give them a freedom to play around with other forms of thinking and researching and working through this expanded ideas of the arts as well. And because we're also expanding ideas of ecology, we're always looking for ways of relating and bringing into connection all of these agents and players, very much like, well, a lot of you are doing. I'm very much inspired by the Zoöp work, because I will see how it really connects to somehow what we're doing with Suelo. So Suelo was our pilot project, and I'll start sharing my screen In 2014, here we go. No, this one. In 2014, and do you see the image here?
We got it.
Okay, great. I'm just gonna make this bigger. And this was our pilot project in 2014, which I'm now redoing into a methodology or a toolkit, because I also, since COVID, realized, keep coming back to Suelo as a way of really connecting again with place. Like the fact that we were, during the pandemic, also very much taken away from the environment and from our communities. This idea of localization, or to like reconnect with a place, I thought maybe Suelo could be a good way to do that. And so Suelo basically focuses, Suelo is soil in Spanish, first of all, and it focuses, of course, on the importance of soil as the key to human health through nutrition and so on, but also to to planetary health, with one of the keys to climate change mitigation. But we take it a step further and look at it as a very much like a holistic picture of a place. So like by looking to one place, and if you look at any place, all places have different soils and different ecosystems. So the result of your soil profile or Suelo toolkit would look very different depending on where you are. But so if you look at a soil profile, you look at the past, present, and future through all of these layers of what a soil profile can reveal. And what we're looking to is to place the importance of this place and this connection to place, but also articulate the natural and cultural value of a place through all of the natural scientific, let's say, background, but also all of the cultural elements that from the past and the present can inform the future. And also then articulate this all these relationships that can support a place and that often are invisible or that are not working together, that could work together to create a more sustainable, plausible, better regenerative future. So very much similar in this Zoöp way of like finding out what are the elements that are particular to this place. What are the holders of knowledge that can tell us different stories that will give us a more holistic perspective or different perspectives about why this place is important and why do we have to take care of it and keep it. So this sort of profile, the idea is that an institution or a school or an individual could use it as a way to reconnect to a place, and to, the result could be somehow what Tetcam is doing with the orchard, realizing that 10 minutes from here, we have this orchard that we could regenerate. And through that, activate a series of interactions that would place us in a different relationship with our environment. So I'll just share with you so that we can go then on to a nice discussion with everybody. Just images from our pilot project. All of our projects end in publications, which was the end result, let's say, of this like portrait of the place that was Punta San Lorenzo in the south of Veraguas. Panama City is where this star is. So that's where most of the things happen in Panama. As you can see in this map, Panama is between Colombia and Costa Rica and Central America. And the Suelo project took place in Punta San Lorenzo in Veraguas. In a very special house that is also the design of the space, such as the design of our format, of our program, is very much open and connecting to the elements, but also welcoming a variety of people. So in this case, we had, like I said, a multidisciplinary residency where we had activists and architects and scientists and artists and scientists who are artists and vice versa. And most importantly, the local community of the local beach there, Arrimadero. And the Suelo methodology takes place through sharing stories and really haptic hands-on experiences through everyone is an expert. It's a very horizontal exchange so that everyone is an expert in their life. And so everyone has something to share, and through sharing their stories, we get to understand these different perspectives, which in the normal life that we're living nowadays in this compartmentalized way we rarely get to sit down and share these kind of stories with each other, or to get to know each other in this way. So in this image, one of the key things which then led us into this art and science lab that we do was sharing the history of the rocks that you see in this image. That was one of the holders of knowledge, or the let's say one of the elements that gave us sort of a lot of knowledge to share, was these rocks that you see in the picture are 70 million years old, and they tell the story of the rising of the isthmus. They were some of the first rocks that started forming the isthmus 3 million years ago, when it closed 3 million years ago, joining North and South America. A very important story, which is told in the Biodiversity Museum designed by Frank Gehry in Panama City, but the local community didn't know about this story. So one of the big aims of this particular suelo was to share the story that the geologist Anthony Coates then shared with everybody. That even though they hired people from the community to extract the rock for the museum, they hadn't bothered to tell them what this rock was all about. So just as a simple example there. And another point of entry was composting, and how actually a lot of these ideas and these different disciplines end up composting each other within the experience itself of this methodology. So we had a 10-day compost, which was motivated by the artist Claire Pentecost, who I met in Documenta, just as a way to make these connections of how the global North and South are interacting. Here I am meeting Claire at a workshop looking at soil through the microscope. Oh, something's happening here.
Thanks for bringing Claire in the presentation. Yeah. It's so nice to see her.
Yeah, well, she came to Panama, and here she is doing compost with everyone and teaching us about that, and also showing soil health, different samples of soil through the microscope with the community, and explaining how soil is so connected. You know, this biodiversity in the soil relates on all of these different scales, from the micro-intimate to the local, to the national, to the global. And so the last thing is that we also use soil as material and different manifestations of soil to create soil kinship exercises, which are forms of connecting with each other, with the community, mostly, of course, as happens often in rural areas, or perhaps also urban areas. Mostly women and children participated with us. And in this last image, we produced a publication. Everyone kind of, all of the stories were inside this book. So then the book was brought back to the community and shared. And this was the day we did the launch, let's say, in the community. And this is the rock. This is one of the holders of knowledge, a pillow lava, a sample of pillow lava, which Dr. Anthony Coates spoke for. As you explained, Klass, with the Zoöp, you have these people that speak for the non-human in a Zoöp. And I was taking notes with your methodology there, because really similar to what I'm trying to go for.
Yeah, going back to that question also that was in the chat, it's not actually necessarily speaking for. I think these voices can be heard, but it's more translating right. into organizational decisions. It's a human job. Like these are things that rocks cannot do, although they really do speak. If you know how to listen, all that story is there for you to. Yeah. But how to translate that is another job. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Translating is a good word. I think that's also somehow how we see ourselves as facilitators in our attempts, in our experiments, which is what I call what we do a lot in our organization. So I think I'll stop there and let us transition.
Thank you so much, Ella, and the four of you really for these beautiful and inspiring stories and visions of interweaving in a way a place, care, and institutions or non-institutions. I think I have too many questions, and I really want to keep a lot of space for the Q&A. So I think I'll actually pick up on one question that was asked in the chat that is actually about institution, and it was about, I think Jessica wrote it, that it's the question of how to enable vulnerable practices during this time of closed institutions. But I think we could add to that, and Nataša, you kind of picked up upon that, outside of the pandemic, even when it's not a pandemic, some institutions are closed all the time anyway for people, communities, beings. So, and that's also part of the problem. So not just to mention social communities, but also non-human communities who are not anyway the concern of some institutions. So I think maybe if I would add just one question, it would be a round of reactions to that question. And I think Amal started to, I like that you brought in maybe a very practical, but also radical response, saying like, okay, we need to open institutions, we need to rechannel resources. A Excel budget sheet can be a radical space to do that. So I'd like to know if you can maybe elaborate a bit on these empirical possibilities to work within those or in between those frameworks. Maybe Nataša, if you want to start, because the question was addressed to you, but I think you can all sort of react to that, hopefully.
Yes, I think honestly, regarding this vulnerable practices, and yeah, I think it's really where one positions oneself, actually. And we, within the, at least how we understand this initiative, as I told you, it's a non-funded body. If I receive now from this fee that goes from ZKM, we go to the group, we ask where there are problems, or if this can be, you know, somebody, maybe Ismail needs it for material to do some more jewelry, or it might go into paying Joanna, who is working with us on trying to communicate among ourselves and lead a kind of more mediatory position, let's say. So, but I think it's really, and I also hear it from everyone's positions, it's about, the question is about the privilege. We are doing it from a certain perspective of a privileged person or a privileged professional, let's say. So, meaning that with our competencies, with our resources, we are trying to, I think, see how to transform something that is not yet there, or how to enable that something lives that is not yet there. So this would be just my, and the reaction why, because some might say, well, it's a closed group. Yes, it is a closed group. We are 20-25 people now, and but we are really located in a greater Paris, and we know mostly what to, that this is a kind of, let's say, a size that is in which mutuality is possible, let's say. But that would be just to also bring in the position of privilege. I think it's really important.
Thank you, Nataša.
Yeah, just to add there, and it was like really, it's lovely to, very inspiring to hear all of the different kind of practices, and also I'm always very interested in the empirical and the how, and I think that point on privilege and position is really important. I feel like that's the thing that infuriates me as someone that's always, like, for the past 12 years have been paid by like a major institution and like move between you know, institutional kind of permanent positions, even if I have a black sheep or like gotta fire that person reputation within them. But I do feel like privilege is really important. I like can't stand the neutrality of museums and like feeling like this is a public space, because it, you know, I mean, we all know that they really aren't public spaces, but I do think especially in these, when you're holding space or creating support structures for many, many things to happen with people and situations that are experiencing a lot of trauma and oppression, I think that is, it's very important to talk about power and power relation. I think one of the reasons I'm so attracted to radical pedagogies and Brazilian, specifically 60s, 70s methodologies, is because power is the central kind of idea that's being played with in these methodologies, and it helps to like bring those conversations to the forefront faster in a way that feels more equal than like this top-down way. But yeah, just like on this empirical way of addressing the vulnerability, I think definitely I heard there with Nataša, and it's just kind of like, what do we do if the money comes through? What do we do with it? And what's the most urgent thing? And it isn't, most of the time, it's not making a artwork for people to look at. All the time, it's about like, I need a lawyer. This person needs a lawyer today, so we're all going to do that. Or, you know, I've had so many, because I do really long processes. I think the length and moving at the speed of trust is really important. That idea of trust and kind of like thinking about creating a space where at a moment, if you've decided to run a workshop or event, if somebody's like, I have an emergency, I need you to come to my deportation hearing, that's what we all do that day. And I feel like that's where invisibility is really important, when you're still working under the structures of an institution that does not see something that doesn't have this clear capitalistic function of display or even a representation of a political process. Like that's more acceptable than actually like doing that. So in the budget, just to answer your question earlier about the budget sheet, for me, it starts to become, how do we pay people that may not usually get paid in a space where your budget is looked at in a different way, for example? So I won't go into too much detail, but like say, for example, asylum seekers are not allowed to be paid in the UK, and I assume in other cities in Europe, but they get a salary, whatever, from the government. So there are ways that you can start to build that in. You can talk about travel money in a different way. The food budget for your program is going to be minus 5,000 times more expensive than any other program, just because food is sometimes the reason we are together, you know? And so, yeah, I think that's where the budgets can be more radical, especially if you're working within or directly within that umbrella safety of the museum. I would like really hear you with the independent and interdependent, because I know that it's a different story there, the negotiation you have around budgets. But I feel like those are decision-making ways, decisions and methods that we can use at all scales, actually. And it's about priority. And if you do have a small budget, you can prioritize paying everybody in the room, or you can prioritize having a nice heavyweight paper for your book. You know, like there's like different decisions, but everyone has agency, I think, whatever the scale.
Klass, you also had a reaction?
Yeah, I responded to that when you said trust. It was like, so there's let's say the distinction between the institutional relation and the personal relation in a way. And I think that's like you can use one to enter in the other. I'm really very interested, and like it's not necessary at this moment, not really part of the Zoöp practice, but the Excel sheet as the site of radical decision making, I totally understand. And in a way, Zoöp do this by transferring, let's say, hard currencies into ecological quality of life. So there's definitely a capital transfer. But this, no, sorry, sorry, I don't want to take up too much time. The issue I respond to is that of building personal trust relations, and these are really at odds often with the notion of the institutional identity. So and this is what you can do if you're in this secure position. So in that sense, I'm very in a similar way, in a similar position as Amal. I'm also I'm highly privileged and protected where I work. Yeah.
Thank you, Klass. Ella?
I just wanted to add to that. I remember actually during the documenta talking a lot with Theaster Gates. He talks about privilege because he does a lot of community work as well. And he talks about leverage. And if you have a certain privilege, to use your privilege as a leverage to be able to empower or to pass it on to others. Yeah. And just to know when you need to step up your profile for the others and when you step down and let others take on their take on the spotlight, you know? And so that's a learning process, I suppose. But also in terms of, I love this idea of like playing around with the Excel sheet and also just like to shift the economy, like to a more ecological economy, of course. What I had written down when you were, the question that you had, Stéphane, was like about how can institutions do this, is that they shift not only towards these more trust relations, but like the priorities, but their values. Like if you just change your values, any organization has their values, which is why they're going towards their mission and vision, and we have our set of values. And if you can start to re-examine those, you can transform those into whatever you want. So you can make those shifts. It's not so easy to convince the board, perhaps, but it's part of the work.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And it's interesting and quite telling also that we're in this time thinking of the Excel as a radical space. Like maybe in the 60s or 70s, artists would have just said, okay, now we go in the street and we create this or do that, involve everyone. And now we're like, it's very different, no? But on the other hand, I'm not sure also ideas of completely rethinking values of a group, of an organization, to deconstruct these positions of privilege and include voices of rocks and trees that don't have translators is also something that really, you know, you're all bringing up. So and I think that's also reversing the perspective. I'm just looking a bit at the time because I think it would be really nice to open the Q&A, and we have to leave the room so that the technical host can take a break before the next panel. So we have to leave the Zoom around 4. So thank you so much for this discussion, and let's continue with everybody in the Zoom audience, everybody who's here. Lena, do you want to guide us a little bit through the Q&A?
Yeah, I would love to. I've already collected some questions. I think it's best if I just start chronologically. There's a question by Barbara. Barbara, if you like, you're very welcome to read out your question by yourself, but I can unmute you. But if not, it's really fine. I can read the question out myself too. Whatever you feel like, if you're listening right now. If not, I just start reading out your question. Barbara's asking Stéphane, please tell us about any institutional difficulties and oppositions you had when persuading Tetcam to include the ORCAD as a part of the museum facilities.
That's a good one. I don't want to make the Zoom too self-referential because I think it's good to leave the space for questions for the speakers. But if you want, and if there is a moment that is relevant, I will say a few words about this.
Okay.
But, spoiler, there was no like a major obstacles, I think. I think the real meat when you change an institutions is more the painful situations, like we were discussing with Tino Segal on the first day, asking museums that needs climate control to store in very particular material conditions a lot of objects, and that cost a lot of money and energy to stop that, to do something else. That's not just twisting a knob in a control panel. That's changing the values of the organization. That's changing basically what the museum or the institution is and does. So I think that's where the obstacles are, rather than adding some activities. But we could talk about it maybe more. So maybe Lena, you can also go through the next questions.
Yes, there's another question by Daria. Daria, it's the same to you. If you feel like reading it out, just give me a hint. Maybe via Zoom. Maybe that's easier. It's a question to Klass. But then I just read it. Klass, it would be interesting to bring in the question harvested on the Mentimeter on the first day of the assembly. And the question is, who are the CEOs of a permacircular museum? Klass has just not been here.
I just let him in, so I think he should be here.
Reconnecting.
Hi, Klass. There is a question for you by Daria. Who are the CEOs of a permacircular museum?
sorry, could you repeat the question?
Who are the CEOs of a permacircular museum? Who could they be?
Yeah, I can say, well, practically, so this the curriculum that starts next Friday is actually aimed to gather a couple of people who are interested in this position of participating in a Zoonomic Foundation. So basically, we see a necessity to have both kind of the ecological and also artistic sensibility at the same time, to be also versed in organizational transformation. So to know how an actual working organization needs to transform its policies, its behaviors, reconsider its morals, and so you have to. Those kind of two strands are necessary. So, and then practically every organization that is to some extent instituted has a board, and this is formally always where at least decisions have to be acknowledged. They're not always the site of the decision making, but they're at least whatever happens has to be decided there, acknowledged there. So this is also where, let's say, the determination to bring in this change is best suited. Because and at the other position in an organization, it's always a little bit arbitrary whether it leads to actual change or not. I'm not sure that answers your question, but it's a very pragmatic answer. So in short, yeah.
Okay, so I will just go to the next question. It's by Helena. Helena is asking, is it art institutions or science institutions, such as science museums, that need to reinvent themselves, or possibly both? How does one transform the standard definition of the museum icon top down, even if amazing work is being developed bottom up, in some cases in an invisible way to the general public? Zoöp project has shown that the museum space is obsolete. ...
I have a thought that I wanted to share just because you mentioned Zoöp. This is something that didn't end up happening, but the original idea for the Biomuseum in Panama, designed by Frank Gehry, and designed also by the Bruce Mau thinkers, the whole concept, they originally wanted the whole country to be the museum, and that the building of the Biomuseum would be the showcase of all of this knowledge that exists in the country, arguing that Panama is one of the most biodiverse countries on the planet, mostly because of its small size. I'd say Brazil is more biodiverse, but Panama, because it's so small, you can see so many different ecosystems because of its geological history and so on. Costa Rica too, so many places are. I want to say Panama is, although the story in the museum is a little bit aggrandizing of Panama in itself. But anyhow, Zoöp was my idea partly was that it could insert itself so easily in this narrative that the entire country is a museum, and that would therefore make people visit so many places within the country to experience this museum or the country, and also empower the communities to be the hosts of all of this knowledge of themselves and this natural and cultural history knowledge. And the museum would only be a showcase. So if institutions really shifted or natural, I mean, I think, for example, natural history museums absolutely need to update themselves as showcases for other things that they're doing, or that they sponsored events somewhere else, and not only help this like fear of scarcity, like we need to have X amount of visitors to our space, but that we can actually be more wealthy by enabling these other things, like this other idea of wealth, that we can attract a different type of wealth or interest or support, not only for us, but for others, by enabling this for other people, that would just bring us further instead of still holding on to all the resources just for ourselves. Unfortunately, this mentality of scarcity did take over because they felt like they had to cover all the expenses of building this really fantastic structure and so on and so forth. So they did centralize the funds towards the building itself instead of opening it up for the whole country. But it's a beautiful, generous idea, which I think is something that one could suggest more. and therefore also support projects like Suelo, which was funded by a crowdfunding campaign and just blood, sweat, and tears by me and all the volunteers that helped make it happen. Yeah.
If I just thank you, Ella, for this beautiful, example. But about the question, whenever we start to talk, and also like I'm self-critical here and self-reflexive. Whenever we say this immense questions of artists versus institutions, etc. I mean, Stéphane, I think you also mentioned that the institutions are people. Institutions are bodies of not only people, they are bodies of humans, non-humans, all kinds of factors. And how to change institutions otherwise than through a process of, going in different directions of building other kinds of relationships, other kinds of governances, other kinds of Excel sheets for budget. I think that this is all part of it. So, and especially in this Eurocentric idea of institution, I think this is where the problem lies, that this is like the walls that, we have to tear down, etc. I think I see too much of that metaphor still. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think that what everyone does here is in this panel, but also during the conference, I think you spoke at length at that. It's really about the understanding it as not only the built walls. I mean, the fact that the person we work with who is depolluting the space on spiritual levels and it includes centuries of that work. I think it's quite something, to be able to do that within this art context in France that is so rational and so white privileged and so forth. I think it's and she's a Merindian, Afro-Merindian. So. Yeah.
Thank you, Katitu, for this work. Does any of the speakers want to add or give a little closing thought?
Just something, maybe just some thoughts about, bringing together some of the things. I really love that example of that top-down nation project and just remembering like a lot of these museums. I mean, I'm from Bahrain and Singapore, like I'm from kind of former colonies that are redefining their idea of what makes a nation state, like in very different ways, but always in relation to this European idea of institution, I think. But yeah, I do feel like we're in a moment of, it feels different this year, and maybe because I've been in London, like just that lockdown energy and how bad it was here in London. But I feel like these conversations about decomposing that, like these older models are just much louder than they've been before. And I guess the one thing I would say is bottom up, top down, or, through all sides. I think what the whole idea, I think we need to just hold an intention and think about ways we could collectively hold an intention to adapt these spaces or these sites or these constellations of people and activities into like into spaces where we can operate in a more liberatory way. And by doing that, we need to actually grieve and look at, in a more honest way, what these spaces have been till now, as we're trying to intervene and change. Because I'm like also quite bored of being like opposing this like institution, because it's so much more complex than that. And so I'm interested in thinking of what are the ways or the methods we can start to not just be in opposition, but first acknowledge what's going on and then practicing new ways of being, and there'll be lots of growing pains.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I think the
last word for Klass.
I think the practice bit is extremely important. So there's let's say there's a whole lot of work to be done, or has been done, in considering this and spinning this alternative narratives and aligning our thoughts. But the proof of the pudding is really in entering this in a practical material sense. And this is So it's also maybe a silly opposition, but the doing, this doing of other relations, the doing of other morals, this doing of opening up is also if you don't know yet what comes out. So sorry, that's actually the whole point I'm trying to make. That you have to in a way, if you have this position of privilege, then you should have the balls to try something. Before consider like maybe this costs us this or maybe this costs our. So this I'm very happy at the New Institute. At least we like this is really a responsibility we take from the whole. Something that kind of is shared between everybody. That like we have to. If not us, then who? Like we are in this position that we're in the ability. We have the budget. We can do this. So we should really take up this responsibility and try out things even if they fail also. And in that sense, the institution acts literally as this shelter. It's the walls in which you can do things because they're like extremely stable and protected. So that's really something that you can also wield in a certain way if you're
So let's decompose and compost the old models, but keep some wall to take some leverage, I guess.
Imagine if you destroy them all. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I want to. Well, thank you, Klass, and really, I want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart for this very, stimulating and beautiful discussion. I'm just taking a few words that resonate still, such as listening, trusting, grieving, decomposing, cooperating, collaborating. That's a new word I'm very happy to have learned. They're coming in the chat still, translating, sheltering, facilitating. So yeah, thank you so much. I feel we could go on for 2 hours. And the day is not finished. We can reconvene in 1 hour for the next and last panel of this assembly. Which will deal more specifically with the education mission of both institutions and para-institution, alter institution, non-institutions. And it will be a beautiful moment. So yeah, hope to see you in 1 hour. And thank you again, everyone, really.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stéphane.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, everyone in the team.
Yeah, lovely to be on it.
Really nice.
And thank you all. Lovely to meet you. Ciao.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye. Thank you.